Now the difference today is that a working child cannot get up. There are working children. There are 123 million working children in India below the age of 14 today. But a child cannot get up today and say, I am a working child, because then he will be picked up and put into a remand home immediately. Now our strategy today on child labour is to pick up children and put them into remand homes or into a so-called institution, and to penalize the parents and the employer. Now the real question is, how are we going to do that for 123 million children? Are we going to pick all of them up and put them into institutions and penalize their parents and their employers? And children keep coming into the workforce. Children grow up, they cross the age of 14, then nobody is bothered. But new children come into the workforce, because you're not solving the causes. What we are dealing with today is the demand side and not the supply side. We are cutting off the demand side of child labour, saying you cannot employ a child, but we are not dealing with the reasons why children come into the workforce. So Bima Sangha was our first step. But then Bima Sangha was recognized by government, by the Labour Department. There were official letters to Bima Sangha. They would be called for meetings. The police would negotiate with them. And this was until the WTO and the World Bank started putting strictures on countries like India, saying you're using child labour and therefore your prices are lower, and therefore there were trade restrictions, and we know that story. And then we started becoming more and more ban-oriented, and we started hiding figures of child labour. We started pretending that children did not really exist. Now we are doing a very interesting thing in India. The only way you can get child labour figures is by looking at enrollment and dropout rates, and then you make an estimate or a guesstimate. That's one way, because the surveys don't really reflect child labour. So you know how many children are enrolled, and the enrollment figures are 110%. Not 100, 110%. And this is the official figure. But then you look at the dropout rate is 65 to 70% in the first year of school. And so what are those children doing? Where are they? Let's take out, say, 10, 15% of children who may be disabled or specially abled. You're still left with a very large number of children. Now what we are going to do is, we are not going to get the dropout statistics, because we are going to push children up to the 8th standard without an exam. So the statistic you'll get of dropouts is only the admission in the 9th. So we'll have the 110% admission. Children will be pushed up to the 8th standard. In the 9th standard we'll say, oh well, they don't want to do high school. But you won't have a child labour figure. And that's one way of hiding a statistic. But anyway, coming back to the story of the children then said that we want to deal with local governments. And the first step to do that was that there was no Panchayati Raj at that time. Panchayati Raj came in later. So they wanted to deal with the local Zilla Parishad. And with Bima Sangha, as Bima Sangha, they started doing that. They started having meetings, they started negotiating. And it was very interesting, the methods that children used to get local governments to listen to them. One, and I'll just give you one small example. Children were learning Yakshagana. We were teaching them Yakshagana. And Yakshagana is a dance drama system in Karnataka, very much like Kathakali and in Kerala. And so they decided that they would do a procession through all their villages and come to the local Zilla authority in their costumes, and one was the king and one was the queen, and they were ministers, and all of them were carrying sacks. And they collected on the way all the problems that children faced in every village. So the children put their problems into the sacks, and they started carrying these sacks and collecting these problems. Came to the Zilla, that is the Taluk headquarters, and there was a big stage, and the children were going to do a play, and all the officials were there, all the the BIC and everyone, right? District and Zilla and Taluk, all the officials were there. Children started this play. There was the king and the queen and the ministers. And the king started off in the Yakshagana style, which is very interesting. And he started calling his ministers and saying, okay, what happened, to water? They're supposed to, he pulled out problems from the sack. And they said, okay, that village has a water problem. So what have you done about it, minister? And then the minister looked into the audience, and Department of Water was sitting there. So he said, please come up, please come up. In the beginning, they thought it was, part of the play, so he came up. And then he said, what have you done about the water problem in Alur? And that man thought he was part of the play, so he said, oh, we'll pray for rain. Let's pray for rain. And then all the children booed him. And then he had to give a proper answer. And so, in that fashion, they got each of the departments to answer the questions in the sack. And that is very interesting, that whole methodology, because it was not a direct attack. But it still made local government accountable. And it made local government accountable in front of an audience of nearly 5,000 people who were parents from all those villages. And children found a method to do that. Later, when the Panchayat Raj came in, they decided that they wanted to interact directly with the Panchayat Raj on a regular basis. They didn't want it to be, based on a request and, negotiation, and whether the Gram Panchayat was willing to meet them or not. And so they set up what they called a Makkala Panchayat, or Children's Panchayat. And that is a parallel Panchayat to the regular Panchayat. And they held elections just like the Gram Panchayats. They had candidates who were aged 11 to 14, and they actually voted. There were constituencies, there were ballot boxes, and the local administration conducted those elections. And the Makkala Panchayats had regular interactions with the Gram Panchayats. They had a meeting with them every month. And the Makkala Panchayats interacted with their children, their constituency children, on a regular basis, collecting problems, finding out how things were, etc. But when the Gram Sabhas started working in Karnataka, the children said, why don't we also have a Gram Sabha? And we had the first Gram Sabha in a village called Keradi in Kundapur Taluk. And it was really amazing because all the children from the village participated. They actually discussed things with the Gram Panchayat. The Gram Panchayat was made accountable. They had to take down those issues. They had to report back to the children. And later, because it was so successful and because the Gram Panchayats themselves found it so useful, this has become mandatory now in Karnataka. In Karnataka, every Gram Panchayat has to hold a Makkala Gram Sabha at least once a year. They have to videotape it, it has to be recorded, the children's issues have to be noted down, and they have to report back to the children on action taken. And I think this is a very, very unique structure, and the Karnataka government really needs to be congratulated for doing this. I don't know whether they understand it fully, but it's happened and it is done. And it has, as far as we know, and we've worked in various parts of the world, no other country in the world has a system like this, where it is mandatory for a government, local government, to listen to children as citizens and take their issues seriously and act on it. We know of nothing else. There are lots of mock parliaments. mock parliaments that are being held on a regular basis, but this is mandatory, this is real. This is real participation by children in local government. And what this has done is really quite amazing. And recently, just before, when the monsoon started in Karnataka, we had a major crisis on our hands. The monsoon had filled up a lot of what we called agriculture, irrigation wells or irrigation tanks in Karnataka. These irrigation tanks had been dug because of a World Bank grant or loan, which was given in 2011, and they had to finish it before 2012, and before the monsoon in 2012. These irrigation tanks were not built with the permission of the Gram Panchayats. Most Gram Panchayats didn't even know they were being constructed. They are 10 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet deep. JCBs were brought in and they were dug. And they were dug next to what we call kaldaris, or where, you know, people, little pathways, just next to that. When the monsoon came, these things filled up. And we had a spate of 12 child deaths due to drowning in 1 week after the monsoon started. Because these irrigation tanks were next to the pathways where children went to school, where children went to the ration shop, where children walked to play, whatever. And children, of course, are very curious. When it comes to rain, they love to, you know, fiddle around and play and paddle. And you couldn't make out, because once the monsoon hits South Canada, you can't see where the pathway starts and where the, you know, something, the field ends. I mean, it's all underwater. So the children decided to take this up in a big way. They did research. They identified all the danger spots in their villages. They went to the district commissioner and demanded that action was taken immediately to put either fence these wells, these irrigation canals, put up danger signs. Some of them needed to be filled up, and action was taken, amazingly, action was taken in 15 days' time. And this was because the children had that organization already. They knew how to do research because we had given them the tools to do research. They had collected information. They knew how to negotiate. They knew how to present this information. And they got it done. And they got it done the way they wanted it done. I think if we had planned that initiative, we would have planned it very differently. They knew where the danger spots were. They knew what kind of warning signals they wanted. They knew where the fencing needed to be done. And when you look at it from a child's perspective, it's very different when an adult designs an initiative, and where children are also part of designing an initiative. It gives you a very different perspective. And I'll just give you one more example before I close. There was a little stream in a village which during the monsoon rises quite high. The village, the Gram Panchayat had decided to build a bridge in one part of that stream. But the children wanted a bridge at a different point in that stream. And the children went to the, Gram Panchayat and said, we want the, a footbridge here. And they said, yes, don't worry, but we are going to build a beautiful big bridge. It's going to cost some 5 lakhs and we've got the sanction. And we're going to build it there, so don't worry, it's a beautiful bridge. So this little girl, and it was a very young girl who was presenting this, she said, no, we want the bridge here. And they said, it's okay, we're building that bridge. Why are you so worried? Beautiful big bridge, don't worry. And the girl didn't know what to do. And then she stood her ground and she stood up. And after a point she got really frustrated and she said, I know why you want the bridge there. You want the bridge there because there is an arak shop at the other end. And when you guys get drunk, you don't know how to cross the water, the stream. And that's why you want the bridge there. We want the bridge here. The bridge is only going to be, the length is only 3 benches long. I mean, she gave it in her school, school benches long. And all we need is 3 coconut trees tied together so we can cross it. And she said, you come with me. And she took the president of the panchayat and she said, you walk. When the water, where does the water come for you? So the water came for, up to his waist, which is okay for a man to walk across. But the child, it was up to here. And that man, it was amazing because he changed immediately. And he said, now I understand why children's participation is so important. And of course that bridge was sanctioned. They built it and they got there, not just coconut trees, but they actually built the bridge where the children wanted it. Because 20 children needed to go to school from there. So the question is not just, it's in the Convention of the Rights of the Child and children's participation is important, children's participation is good for children, children's participation is useful for local governments because they get an insight into what children really need and therefore planning becomes more, appropriate. When it serves children, you actually serve the whole community. I mean, these are a lot of arguments. But I think what it also does is it forces governance structures to change. Because the Makkala Gram Sabhas are not held the same way as the adult Gram Sabhas. The Makkala Gram Sabhas, everybody sits on the ground in a circle, including the panchayat president and all the officials and the children, and they discuss and they talk. They know, there's no podium. They're not sitting on the podium and making political speeches. They're not thinking about the next election. And this bridges a gap, it breaks down a wall, and it makes people more accountable. So it has had an effect on structures to some extent. I mean, this is just a Makkala Gram Sabha. But just imagine if children's participation was accepted and recognized in all institutions of governance, including the family. I mean, how would the structure of family change? What would be the power relations between adults and children if we really recognized children had a right to participate? If I was going to go decide on buying a house, and if I consulted my children before, if I had to consult, or did consult my children before doing that, would it change that decision? Would it change the relationship between me and my child? What would it do to schools if we accepted children's participation as a right? What would it do to the relationship between teacher and student? It's not me delivering and you receiving, and learning by heart and me correcting. It's learning together. It's understanding. It's admitting that I don't know in many cases. It's accepting that you might have something to teach me as well. And it would also mean that I am not molding children in my image. And what is my image? I'm cynical. I do not believe in governance. I do not believe in democracy. I believe everybody is corrupt. I think nothing can change. And I believe in being devious. I believe in paying a bribe when I have to get another, beyond that 8 cylinders that we have been allowed now, gas cylinders. I need 15, so I will pay a bribe and get it. So it's going to change that dynamics. So the real question that I would like to leave you with is, if we accept this as a right, and this does not mean that children decide everything. This means that children participate in decisions with us. How is it going to change power relations, structures, and attitudes of us adults, and especially those in power?